Hi, Misha here, and earlier this year showed us putting the first rounds through this gun, the Polish WBP Jack, chambered for 7.62 by 39. This is a pretty standard AKM type, but in that first video I said I was kind of setting it up like an AKML, or maybe AKMN. Either way, here it is set up in a night fighting configuration with an NSP 3, or if you prefer, 1 PN27 passive night optic. In fact, this was really the first production passive night scope, starlight type scope, that the USSR and Warsaw Pact had. These came around the 1960s, mid to late, and while many were made in Russia with components supplied elsewhere, many more were made in places like Poland by Factory 131. And so I thought, let's talk about it. And yeah, just to remind you, here's a shooting clip from earlier of this rifle. Pretty much set up like this, sans the optic and bipod. And now let's try the Jack with an old school Polish mag. It shoots again.
All reliable.
So what's the difference between the AKML rifle and the AKMN rifle? Both come from the factory with the optional side rail attachment for pretty much standard Warsaw Pact, whereas of course at the time the standard AKM had no side rail. The difference was really just in the rail. And here we have the Jack. Notice how this is a non-lightning cut rail. This is not an AKML rail. The actual AKML rails had a plate, just like a plate riveted to the side, and then it had an adapter for the mount screwed onto that. It was relatively thick and heavy. The AKMN came later, so I brought my SAR1 out just to show you, and it introduced a single piece rail with lightning cuts. So that's why this kind of reminds me, even though it's not an AKML rail, they were more slab-sided like this, as opposed to having the cuts like this. So the main difference, the AKML had a heavier rail that was two-piece, and the AKMN had a single-piece rail that was a little bit lighter. They were both nominally just, Warsaw Pact standard side rails. And of course, the AKML would have earlier optics, like the 1 PN27, and the AKMN could have that, or it could have later, like the 1 PN34 or even 58. So just a evolution of the design and what have you. Just wanted to point that out, since it's kind of unclear, since they're both intended for night fighting. They also had a variant of each that had a P suffix, which meant they were fitted with tritium or phosphorescent night sights. Not common, but this was a factory variation of the ML or MN as well. And of course, we had underfolding versions of each, AKMSL, AKMSN. And they would be essentially the same, but having the underfolding stock, and it would be slightly modified to make clearance for the side rail, and also the rear sling swivel would have to be a little bit relocated. Yeah. Lots of little minor variations, and most of these were not produced in huge numbers. Now, the AKML was a set with kind of 3 additional components, and there was only one major difference between the standard AKM and it, as far as the rifle itself. We'll get into all that. Full disclosure, I am not terribly knowledgeable on optics in general, and I'm not terribly knowledgeable on night vision. I wonder why. But you know what? It's been a minute since I've done an AK video. I bet we can find a way to have some fun. What do you think? So let's talk about the components and, some differences and variations over the years that these were in service. Why not? There were two major components, two major accessories for the AKML, which could carry over to other guns like the RPKL and the later AKMN. First and foremost, we have this unique birdcage flash hider. These were fitted to the gun and were even serialized. They would have the last 3 digits of the serial of the rifle they belonged to imprinted on the bottom. Well, in this case the side, but if it were for this gun, it would have been. And that's just to have a good tight fit. Makes perfect sense. And they were essentially mated and married to the gun. And only would be replaced if, they wore out or something. And there's a few minor variations in the way these are made. Namely, some of them have sharper edges and some of them have more rounded edges. And of course, this was very critical to protect the night vision device from muzzle flash from the light. Otherwise, it would very quickly damage or even destroy it. And we actually did a test of the flash hider when we took this out shooting. So check it out and see what you think. So let's try this fancy AKML flash hider here at dark.
Man, that is a sensationally effective flash hider.
Yeah, it was designed for working with their night vision optics, so kind of had to be, I guess.
I mean, typically our last shoot of the day out here in the cabin is to break out something punchy and throw some fireballs out the end. That was next to nothing.
Take your word for it. Quite effective, I would say. And they fit very well. They have actually 5 different timing slots or notches, so you can get a good fit. That was pretty much always kept on the gun. Also, note that with it on, you cannot use a bayonet. Just one of those things. An optional accessory was this bipod. It was carried in this belt pouch, or holster, as the Russians called it, which is kind of cool. And it was optional. It was designed to quickly and easily just clip on to the barrel. And it does have a head to rotate up and down, and then it has spring-loaded feet. You just pull it out. Once it's all the way out, it will spring open and basically hold itself open, kind of an inverted Y shape. It's made of lightweight tubular steel, and while very simple, is actually a pretty nifty component. And you can have it attached and fold it up on the rifle too, of course, like this. There you go. Fold it up, it fits right under the front sight base, nice and out of the way. And these were issued with standard 30 round AKM type mags, and in Poland probably would have been 3 round pouches, or 3 magazine pouches rather. Of course, in Russia could be different ones. So those are the accessories for the AKML and other night fighting variations. I don't know if these bipods were ever serialized. Again, it was kind of more of an accessory, whereas the flash hider is treated as a true component. As for the night vision device itself, commonly known as the NSP3, it's also known within Russia, namely, back in the day, is the 1PN27. There was also an updated version known as the 1PN27M. This is actually an improvement, believe it or not. The original NSP2 was an infrared. It had an illuminator, an emitter, and it detected that. So very, first generation or even 0 generation night vision, because it needed something. It used a 6-volt power system. It actually had a battery pack large enough that it had to be carried on the body, like on your belt or in your jacket. and was just overall heavier. And the NSP2 was okay for its day and time. It was actually introduced in the late 50s for use on the AKN, the railed version of the original AK-47. And it was also used within Poland, known as the the PMKN. Yeah, so that was kind of the first shot. This was the first passive night vision, and had the ability to intensify existing light. So light from the moon, light from the stars, hence the starlight thing, or maybe even light from a flashlight. This is actually smaller, lighter, and has an internal battery. The compartment's back here. The lever is here, slides up, and you can open it. It's empty right now because this used a wet cell battery, which was essentially filled with electrolyte. And yeah, fun times. It had a power source of about 4.5 volts. Actually, the batteries, they were in series, so they were 1.5 volts each and linked together. Yeah, life expectancy was better than the NSP2, but still not great by modern standards. Pretty much on and off. And up here we have a 3-position selector. That's because, like Generation 1 night visions, even in the USA, this really didn't have a way to deal with... Sorry, it's stuck down there. I'm going to switch it down. Didn't really have a way to deal with too much light. Too much could easily damage or even destroy the tube. So we had 3 ways here. Basically closed, except just to let a little bit in, and then kind of a medium position to let more light in but still restrict it some, and then fully open to the light. So if it was a kind of a cloudy night, you might want that. If it was a bright moon, middle position, or if there was kind of artificial light nearby. But you definitely don't want to have it full open either during the day or near a bunch of artificial light. And it's an adjustable. We have a knob here. We have a pretty standard mount here with a throw lever. Rubber eyepiece back here. It is bulky and it is quite heavy, but it probably is not as heavy as it might appear. It's mainly just very bulky. Later night visions will have a little more streamlined clamp system. Here's the front end. This actually used a small transformer inside, which is why these kind of make a hum when they're turned on, like an old school TV, because this is old school electronics. These were introduced in the mid-60s and were pretty prevalent by the late 60s and early 70s. Like I said, they were made within Russia. They were also made under license in Poland by PZO, located in Warsaw. And even actually after Russia would discontinue and replace these by newer versions, maybe Generation 1 Plus or even Generation 2, the Polish would continue making these into the 1980s, believe it or not. Although typically when you find those examples, they have not ever been issued. Some of them haven't even had their batteries filled with the liquid. Yeah, these were good for about 75 to 100 meters maximum, although some sources say out to 200. That seems optimistic. And they came in these cases. Now this is the metal version. I've actually had the wooden cases in before, but this one's in the metal. So early ones could have been in a wood case, but then soon they went to a metal transit case. These are watertight with a seal, and they have a good deal of stuff inside. So let's take a look. The scope itself is held in with these padded arms. They're metal on top, padded on the bottom, and they do lock in. There is a manual. And there's some information in this clear envelope on top. It should come as no surprise that the scopes were matched to their issued rifle. They were zeroed at 100 meters and meant to be kept together. And the cases were stenciled to match as well, and come with several goodies inside. And as issued, there was a bunch of spare parts and all kinds of fun stuff. So we have this kind of pouch inside here with dividers. It's fixed to the case. And then there's this spot over here that housed this metal container, which is sealed itself. And inside, we have old Soviet era wet cell batteries. The smell coming off of this is quite interesting. Who knows how long since these have been opened before. It's a neat little metal case, at least. We have some spare bulbs here. We have this thing. I'm actually not sure what that is. We have a spare cup, eye cup, rubber. Pretty hard now, but not completely. We have some cleaning cloths, and we have a spare end piece here. And we have this quite cool field case for the optic, and it has some more gobbledygook inside it too. It's amazing it actually fits in here. If I'm being honest, it fits over here in this side. Things are tightly packed for sure. So in the carry case, in this pocket over here, this has some more spare stuff, and it's got a neat padded shoulder strap. And there's another little strap inside here too to retain things if you need it. So yeah, quite a neat little package. And you guys probably know what some of these doodads and widgets are for better than I do. I am happy to admit where my knowledge ends. I know rifles, but for some reason, a blind guy is not the best one to ask when it comes to optics, day or night, because it's all kind of Greek or Russian to me. Yeah, that's some gunk there on me. Good old wet cell batteries. Yeah. So, let's talk a little bit about what replaced the 1PN27, the NSP3. While putting this back, I noticed I forgot a little tool that was also in this side pocket. Lots of cool stuff in here. It really is. Now, on with the video. So all back in, clamped down. It's amazing it all fits, but it does. And these are designed to be pretty weatherproof. You have pretty standard catches here. And again, it does have a kind of rubberized seal strap to carry it by. Although in the field, you might want to use the provided carry case. And the Jack rifle here does a good job of being a AKML or AKMN base. The rail's not quite right for that, but close. And it does have the smooth top cover instead of the ribbed, but of course that can be swapped out. But everything else is correct on here. The laminate woodstock, synthetic pistol grip. It can take the correct muzzle device. Of course, the bipod. It does have the bolt carrier in the white, but to be fair, early Polish AKM production had that as well. So what about advancements in night vision within the Warsaw Pact within the Soviet Union. Really, the AKML was mostly issued with the early versions, because this was the early scope mounting system. The AKMN was the later refined scope rail, and that's when you start to see newer models like the 1PN34, PN58, and even the PN51 in use today. And that kind of gets us through the Soviet era. But what's the difference? First appearing in the 70s, the 1PN34, or NSPU, was an improved Generation 1 optic based on the NSP 2-3 series. And its major step forward was that it had circuitry that could shut off if too much light was coming in. It was also a little bit lighter and more streamlined. However, like the NSP3, the 1PN27, it still used a liquid cell battery, and it still could be damaged by too much light. The shut-off system was far from foolproof, and it still suffered from fish-eyeing, which I figured I'd better mention in the video before someone did in the comments, which was just something kind of endemic to Generation 1 night vision. That would kind of be issued with the AKMN and often referred to as the AKMN1. And moving into the 80s, we get the 1PN58, which is very similar to the 34, but it was a little smaller and a little lighter. Again, it had some various improvements. You might call this a Generation 1 Plus. Its big leap forward was that it used a solid state battery, so finally get away from the wet cell, and it had some other improvements. It did address some fisheye. It was a little bit cleaner, brighter, but still Generation 1. In the late 80s, at the tail end of the Soviet era, maybe even around 1990, we finally get the 1PN51, which is actually still in service today. And this kind of gets away from the older designs, kind of building upon that. This is an all-new design. It's lighter, smaller, uses newer electronics. And, oh, I forgot to mention, too, the 1PN58 went away from the incandescent bulb to a LED. Something that kind of improved things, too. But the 51 had a longer life expectancy, used a modern battery, and was the first to really be classed as a Generation 2 night vision. It could easily handle light changes, too much light coming in, it could adjust, and it could also work better in very low light to almost pitch black situations. And of course we progressed past Gen 2 as well, and there are newer optics in Russia, but that one's still kicking about. And it just kind of goes to show you where it all connects. Again, I am far from an expert on this at all. I just find history really cool and interesting. But haven't talked about the night fighting guns. By the way, the later versions were known as the AKMN2 and AKMN3 respectively. So they pretty much just added that suffix to designate which optic it was used with. And again, they all kind of use the same Warsaw mount. And that's why the mounts are all adjustable, And that gets us kind of to modern day. Of course, a lot of these will work with 5.45 guns as well as 7.62x39. So, let's wrap things up. J-Ro jacking off.
That was it.
Taneke. Let's end the video by looking at it here on its support lightweight bipod and with its very heavy optic. These are thought to be big and bulky, and by modern standards, even by the standards of the 1980s, definitely are. But by the standards of the 60s, early Vietnam War period, pretty forward-thinking in a lot of ways. And the fact that they're using a lot of elements of the standard rifle. At least they acknowledge the weight by giving it the bipod. Like I said, I just thought this would be a kind of good candidate to transform into an AKML or AKMN, whichever you prefer to call this. And it's an interesting piece of history. But yeah, it's a little bit longer than an AKM thanks to the flash hider, and quite a bit heavier thanks to the Generation 1 Starlight type scope. So let me know what you think. As always, I greatly appreciate you tuning in. If you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.